begins with a vibration, barely audible at first, a low hum beneath the surface of your morning. Not a sound exactly, but a current, flickering alerts, blinking banners, half-read headlines. The quiet is already broken before you even leave your bed. By 2025, noise wears many faces. It no longer shouts, it whispers constantly. 1,000 micro interruptions fraying the weave of a ping from a colleague in another time zone, a meme forwarded with a laughing emoji, an algorithm's urgent suggestion that you don't miss this moment. Each fragment small, each demand soft, but together they form a chorus that never rests. It's not the volume that overwhelms, but the constancy. The world no longer allows silence to settle. In this saturation, solitude has become alien. Stillness feels like a malfunction. Try this: turn your phone off for a full hour. Notice the subtle ache, the phantom limb of connectivity. You may find your thumb hovering over nothing, your attention restless as a bird with no wire to land on. The mind, conditioned to stimulation, begins to murmur its own static. You are alone, and it feels unnatural. But is it? Or is this discomfort the first truth, the threshold before return? Somewhere, buried beneath the hum, lives a memory, older than notifications, older even than language, a memory of being unscattered, a time when presence was undivided. The Buddhist image of the mountain cave, quiet, cool, empty, isn't a place you go, but a place you carry. But the world has taught us to fear that cave, to associate silence with failure, disconnection with invisibility, alone with unloved. Yet look again. Who are you when the world isn't looking? There is a story, apocryphal perhaps, of a Zen monk who was once asked, "Why do you sit in silence for so long?" He smiled and replied, "To hear what only silence can say." That answer holds attention, because in a culture where value is measured in speed and noise, the slow, the quiet, the inward-facing life seems like rebellion, and it is. Solitude in 2025 is subversive, not because it hides, but because it reveals. In the hum of the world, you forget your shape. Solitude is how you remember. It begins with a vibration, barely audible at first, a low hum beneath the surface of your morning. Not a sound, exactly, but a current, flickering alerts, blinking banners, half-read headlines. The quiet is already broken before you even leave your bed. By 2025, noise wears many faces. It no longer shouts, it whispers constantly. 1,000 micro interruptions fraying the weave of thought, a ping from a colleague in another time zone, a meme forwarded with a laughing emoji, an algorithm's urgent suggestion that you don't miss this moment. Each fragment small, each demand soft, but together they form a chorus that never rests. It's not the volume that overwhelms, but the constancy. The world no longer allows silence to settle. In this saturation, solitude has become alien. Stillness feels like a malfunction. Try this: turn your phone off for a full hour. Notice the subtle ache, the phantom limb of connectivity. You may find your thumb hovering over nothing, your attention restless as a bird with no wire to land on. The mind, conditioned to stimulation, begins to murmur its own static. You are alone, and it feels unnatural. But is it? Or is this discomfort the first truth, the threshold before return? Somewhere, buried beneath the hum, lives a memory, older than notifications, older even than language, a memory of being unscattered, a time when presence was undivided. The Buddhist image of the mountain cave, quiet, cool, empty, isn't a place you go, but a place you carry. But the world has taught us to fear that cave, to associate silence with failure, disconnection with invisibility, alone with unloved. Yet look again. Who are you when the world isn't looking? There is a story, apocryphal perhaps, of a Zen monk who was once asked, "Why do you sit in silence for so long?" He smiled and replied, "To hear what only silence can say." That answer holds attention, because in a culture where value is measured in speed and noise, the slow, the quiet, the inward-facing life seems like rebellion, and it is. Solitude in 2025 is subversive, not because it hides, but because it reveals. In the hum of the world, you forget your shape. Solitude is how you remember. There's a quiet violence in never being alone. Not the kind that bruises the skin, but the kind that frays the pulse slowly, invisibly. You begin to feel it not as pain, but as pressure, a tightening behind the eyes, a constant flinching in the soul. In 2025, the body still moves through days, but the mind has been braided into too many threads. Every moment is stitched with expectation. A reply pending, a thought half shared, the awareness that someone somewhere might be thinking of you, or worse, not thinking of you at all. Presence becomes performative. Even rest is restless. You no longer inhabit yourself entirely. Parts of you are outsourced to apps, avatars, impressions. The soul, once whole, now flickers between tabs. This is what it means to live with a pulse too fast. Not just in heartbeat, but in mind beat, in spirit beat. The Buddhist teachings speak often of the monkey mind, leaping from branch to branch, never still. But what happens when that monkey is caffeinated, crowdsourced, and chronically online? You begin to lose track of what is yours and what is merely noise wearing your voice. There is a moment many have felt but rarely name. You close your laptop, you put down the phone, the world falls silent, and in that silence you expect relief, but instead comes a sensation stranger than fear: emptiness. Not a calm void, but a jarring absence, like the quiet after a fire alarm stops. You realize you've been held together by noise. The inner scaffolding is gone, and without it you are unsure how to stand. But that trembling is not failure. It is the first tremor of return. You are not breaking. You are beginning to hear yourself again. Solitude feels sharp only because we have dulled our edges against constant input. But the edges are where form begins, where shape emerges. The mountain cave is not sterile. It is sacred, a space stripped of echoes, where what remains is only what's real. To embrace solitude is not to abandon connection. It is to relearn how to connect without being consumed. And in that slower pulse, there is something ancient waiting. There's a quiet violence in never being alone. Not the kind that bruises the skin, but the kind that frays the pulse slowly, invisibly. You begin to feel it not as pain, but as pressure, a tightening behind the eyes, a constant flinching in the soul. In 2025, the body still moves through days, but the mind has been braided into too many threads. Every moment is stitched with expectation. A reply pending, a thought half shared, the awareness that someone somewhere might be thinking of you, or worse, not thinking of you at all. Presence becomes performative. Even rest is restless. You no longer inhabit yourself entirely. Parts of you are outsourced to apps, avatars, impressions. The soul, once whole, now flickers between tabs. This is what it means to live with a pulse too fast. Not just in heartbeat, but in mind beat, in spirit beat. The Buddhist teachings speak often of the monkey mind, leaping from branch to branch, never still. But what happens when that monkey is caffeinated, crowdsourced, and chronically online? You begin to lose track of what is yours and what is merely noise wearing your voice. There is a moment many have felt but rarely name. You close your laptop, you put down the phone, the world falls silent, and in that silence you expect relief. But instead comes a sensation stranger than fear: emptiness. Not a calm void, but a jarring absence, like the quiet after a fire alarm stops. You realize you've been held together by noise. The inner scaffolding is gone, and without it, you are unsure how to stand. But that trembling is not failure. It is the first tremor of return. You are not breaking. You are beginning to hear yourself again. Solitude feels sharp only because we have dulled our edges against constant input. But the edges are where form begins, where shape emerges. The mountain cave is not sterile. It is sacred, a space stripped of echoes, where what remains is only what's real. And in that slower pulse, there is something ancient waiting. There are two places inside you. One is buzzing, fluorescent, a chamber of mirrors where every thought ricochets into 10 notifications. It is alive with exchange, performance, imitation. This is the digital hive, not just a technology, but a mind state. An architecture of attention shaped by feedback loops. In it, you are never truly alone, and never truly yourself. The other is older, quieter, stone-carved, empty in a way that fills rather than depletes. This is the mountain cave, a space of stillness that does not vanish when you close your laptop. It is the inner refuge you forgot existed, not because it left, but because you stopped visiting. Most people live in the hive now, even when they are alone. Their thoughts are drafted for others, their emotions shaped by imagined observers, like bees circling without rest. They serve a queen they never see. Relevance, visibility, the myth of mattering more when seen. But there is a cost to living entirely in the hive. The self thins. Integrity, not moral, but structural integrity, begins to dissolve. You say what will be liked. You share what will be shared. You think in captions. You love in fragments. Somewhere you forget how to sit in a room and be a single, unbroken presence. The cave, by contrast, demands nothing from you but your full return. In Buddhist practice, the image of the cave is not just symbolic, it is literal. For centuries, seekers walked away from the village noise to enter the mountain silence, not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly. In the dark quiet, where no one affirms or corrects you, something else begins to speak. Not in words, not even in thoughts. It is a presence beneath personality, a knowing that does not explain itself. But how do you enter that cave in 2025 when your world is threaded through glass and signal? You begin by remembering that solitude is not an action, but a direction. It is not turning your back on others. It is turning your face toward what is inward and whole. You do not need to renounce the hive to visit the cave, but you must choose to dwell differently, to listen more than you broadcast, to resist the demand to always be seen. There is a strange discomfort that arrives when you first enter that still place. A ghost loneliness that haunts the early hours. You will feel tempted to check something, to text someone, to fill the absence. Don't wait there. Let the cave open you. Let the silence answer back. There are two places inside you. One is buzzing, fluorescent, a chamber of mirrors where every thought ricochets into 10 notifications. It is alive with exchange, performance, imitation. This is the digital hive, not just a technology, but a mind state, an architecture of attention shaped by feedback loops. In it, you are never truly alone and never truly yourself. The other is older, quieter, stone-carved, empty in a way that fills rather than depletes. This is the mountain cave, a space of stillness that does not vanish when you close your laptop. It is the inner refuge you forgot existed, not because it left, but because you stopped visiting. Most people live in the hive now, even when they are alone. Their thoughts are drafted for others, their emotions shaped by imagined observers. Like bees circling without rest, they serve a queen they never see. Relevance, visibility, the myth of mattering more when seen. But there is a cost to living entirely in the hive. The self thins. Integrity, not moral, but structural integrity, begins to dissolve. You say what will be liked. You share what will be shared. You think in captions. You love in fragments. Somewhere you forget how to sit in a room and be a single, unbroken presence. The cave, by contrast, demands nothing from you but your full return. In Buddhist practice, the image of the cave is not just symbolic, it is literal. For centuries, seekers walked away from the village noise to enter the mountain silence, not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly. In the dark quiet, where no one affirms or corrects you, something else begins to speak, not in words, not even in thoughts. It is a presence beneath personality, a knowing that does not explain itself. The truth is, we don't fear solitude because it's empty. We fear it because it's honest. It offers no applause, no audience, no edit button. It shows us the unadorned self, and that can be disorienting. But it is also the first place where deep peace becomes possible. Not the peace of control, but the peace of relinquishment, of ceasing to manufacture yourself moment by moment. There's a trailhead that marks the crossing. It isn't dramatic. No lightning bolt, no revelation. Just a soft decision to be with yourself without distraction. To breathe fully without needing to prove you're alive. You don't have to delete your accounts or disappear from the grid, but you do have to pause long enough for the dust inside you to settle. Only then can the cave reveal itself, not above you, not ahead of you, but within. That's where the pilgrimage truly begins. You scroll, not out of desire but out of habit, out of muscle memory, out of the quiet panic that arrives when you're not being fed. The feed, endless, glowing, soft in the hand, becomes your company, a substitute for presence, a mimic of communion, a ghost of connection that never quite touches the skin. And yet, in the most connected moment, you feel the sharpest ache of being unseen. This is the paradox of the age. You can be surrounded by avatars, likes, even laughter, and still feel exiled from yourself. Loneliness used to be a condition of isolation. Now it blooms in the crowd, not because people are absent, but because we are no longer fully with ourselves when we're with each other. There is a peculiar kind of sadness that grows from always being partially elsewhere, talking but not grounded in the voice, listening but already formulating a reply, photographing your joy rather than inhabiting it. This is the new shape of solitude, not aloneness, but diffusion, the stretch too thin across too many windows. Years ago, a young monk asked his teacher why he still felt lonely, even after taking vows of silence and retreat. The teacher replied, "Because you're still trying to be understood instead of understanding." That line lingers, it pierces. We want to be mirrored so badly that we forget to sit with our original reflection, the one that arises when no one is watching, when nothing is curated. You might wonder, what does solitude offer that these many digital threads do not? Stillness. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of seeking. The crowded feed constantly asks, "Who are you today? What's your angle? What will you offer us to prove you matter?" Solitude asks nothing. It simply opens the door and waits. It holds no judgment, only space. And in that unadorned space, you begin to feel the weight of your own presence, not as content, but as being. To step away from the crowd isn't to abandon others. It is to return to the ground from which authentic connection can grow. Because until you are fully with yourself, no one else ever really is. You scroll, not out of wonder, but out of wariness. The feed promises company, stimulation, even meaning. But what it delivers is flickering fragments, a friend's update, a stranger's smile, an algorithm's whisper. This might interest you, and for a moment it does. But that moment never roots. It passes like breath on a mirror. You touch everything and are held by nothing. This is the loneliness born not of absence, but of saturation. There is a peculiar ache in the heart of hyperconnection, the kind that arises when your presence is constantly witnessed, yet rarely received. You are seen, but not felt. You perform intimacy through pixels and feel emptier each time. Loneliness now wears mascara. It shares playlists. It joins group chats. It posts often. But solitude, real solitude, isn't about being without others. It's about no longer needing the reflection of others to know you exist. A Zen teacher once said, "When I am with you, I am too. When I am alone, I am whole." The feed convinces us we must be mirrored endlessly to stay real. But deep solitude gently wipes that mirror clean. And what stares back is not a persona, not a profile, but the unspoken core beneath all performances. To retreat from the crowd does not mean to renounce the world. It means you begin again from the center. You sit undistracted. You breathe unmeasured. And in that stillness, loneliness begins to dissolve. Not because someone has finally answered, but because you have stopped asking who you are long enough to feel it. Solitude is not a void, it is a field, and in its wide, unharvested space, something ancient in you begins to grow again, quietly, without needing to prove it exists. There is a moment, shortly after solitude begins, when you feel something unexpected resistance. It doesn't announce itself with fury. It slips in like cold air beneath a door, subtle but undeniable. Your skin itches with the need to check something, anything, a message, a thought, a calendar alert you already know is empty. You sit, supposedly still, but your mind begins to rattle its cage. There is a quiet ache that grows louder in the absence of distraction, a low, persistent hum that asks, why are you doing this? What are you avoiding? What are you losing? This is the ache of quiet, and it's not a flaw in the practice, it is the practice. We've spent years, maybe decades, crafting lives where silence is the exception, not the default. Noise is no longer just external, it's internalized. You carry it with you like heat stored in stone. So when you choose to sit alone, when you close the door and refuse the world's usual invitations, you are not stepping into peace. Not yet. First, you step into withdrawal, and withdrawal hurts. The mind rebels, the body fidgets, memories appear like ghosts you never buried. Plans you can execute start whispering again. Old fears pull at your sleeves, and for a time, you wonder if solitude was a mistake, if it's too empty, too bare, too heavy with what you've left unprocessed. There's a Japanese term, ma, that refers to the space between things, the silence between notes, the pause before a door slides open. In Western culture, we often rush to fill ma with something productive, something useful. But in solitude, ma expands. It becomes the air around you, and at first, it feels suffocating, but only because you've forgotten how to breathe in it. A monk once said that meditation is like sitting with a wild animal. At first, it snarls, paces, bares its teeth. But if you remain, if you do not flinch, chase, or flee, the animal settles. It does not disappear, but it stops needing to fight you. It begins to show its true shape. That's what happens in the H of quiet. You begin to see yourself not as the restless animal, but as the one who is capable of staying. So sit, stay, let the ache rise, let it crest. It's not trying to harm you, it's trying to reveal you. There is a silence that feels like a blessing, and then there is the silence that comes first. The early silence of solitude doesn't greet you with clarity or comfort. It hums with unease. It tastes metallic, like something left out too long. You may feel disoriented, as if you've wandered into a room you're not sure you're supposed to be in. There's no voice to tell you what to do, no feed to follow, no agenda to mirror back, just you and the atmosphere of everything you haven't been feeling. This is the H of quiet, and it is the first gate. Most people turn back here, mistaking the ache for emptiness, the discomfort for failure. But what you're meeting is not the absence of meaning. It's the backlog of your own neglected being. You are not bored. You are surfacing. When the sound of the world falls away, what you first hear is the residue, echoes of all that's unfinished within you. Regret, memory, longing, questions with no clear place to land. The noise was never just out there. It was keeping something locked in. Now that the doors have opened, it all rushes forward. And yet, this is where it begins to shift. If you can stay, if you can breathe through the tightness, the temptation to fill, distract, perform, something quieter than silence will start to move. Not a voice, not a thought. More like a listening that comes from the other side of your awareness. A presence that does not arrive when summoned, but waits to be noticed. In solitude, silence is not absence. It is attention without an object. like a bowl that holds space, like sky that contains the mountain. It is not asking you to become something else. It's asking you to stop moving long enough to remember what you already are. There's a teaching that says the first thing the novice meditator discovers is not peace, but pain. The ache is not punishment. It's the thawing of numbness. It's the unraveling of the self you built to survive the noise. Let it ache. Let it ache like a frozen limb returning to sensation. That's not suffering. That's awakening. At first, the silence is like fog, thick, heavy, formless. It covers everything but reveals nothing. You sit with it, uncertain. The noise of the outer world has died down, but inside, there's still turbulence, scattered thoughts, flickering anxieties, old voices rehearsing themselves. You wait for peace, but what comes instead is emptiness. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels like an unanswered question. But stay. Remain long enough, and something begins to change. The silence, which at first seemed blank and indifferent, begins to take on a texture. It develops weight, presence. It's no longer a void. It's a field that listens. And suddenly, you realize you're not the only one doing the listening. This is the turning point. When the silence stops feeling passive, when it ceases to be something you endure and starts to feel like something that endures you. It receives, it holds, it doesn't reply in words, but in a kind of inward stillness that feels ancient, as though it remembers something you've forgotten. You may be walking through a forest, or sitting on the floor of your bedroom, or gazing at the ceiling in the quiet hour before dawn. And then, without warning, the hum inside you quiets, just a little, and the thoughts fall away, not because you push them, but because something deeper has stepped into the room. You might call it presence, or awareness, or simply the moment becoming itself. In many spiritual traditions, there's an idea that the divine doesn't shout. It whispers, or it waits in silence until we've grown quiet enough to hear. In solitude, when the chatter and the chase dissolve, we begin to tune into that subtler frequency, not just of God or spirit or cosmos, but of the unadorned self, the original self, the one who doesn't need to prove anything, fix anything, or be seen to exist. And here's the paradox: when you meet that self, you no longer feel alone, because what you've encountered is the part of you that was never separate to begin with. Not from the world, not from others, not from meaning itself. The silence begins to listen back, and in doing so, it reveals you've always been held. At first, the silence is shapeless, a blank wall against which your thoughts echo. It feels inert, unresponsive, like the void. You sit in it, waiting for something to happen. Nothing does. The temptation to reach for your phone, for a sound, anything, swells like a tide pressing against the dam of your intention. But something subtle is unfolding. The silence isn't inert, it's listening. And as your resistance begins to soften, the silence reveals its depth, not a hollow absence, but a chamber filled with presence. It doesn't speak in words, but it does respond. You begin to feel yourself held, not by an idea, not by anyone watching, but by awareness itself. It's like walking into a vast cave and realizing the air has memory. There's a line in the Pali Canon, rarely quoted, but quietly luminous, where the Buddha says, "Within this fathom, long body and mind, lies the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation." In the heart of solitude, you begin to glimpse what he meant. The outer world quiets, and the inner world begins to speak, not with noise, but with knowing. Maybe it starts as a sensation, a lightness behind the ribs, a warmth at the base of the spine, a stillness that feels not empty, but awake. It could last only a few breaths or half a moment, but it's unmistakable. The silence is alive, and in its vastness you are not erased, you are remembered. You realize this stillness has been waiting for you longer than you've been seeking it. You have not been exiled from yourself. You've only been standing outside the door, knocking, when all along it was open. And here's the mystery. When you finally allow yourself to be fully alone, you don't feel alone at all, because the one you meet in that silence is not separate from anything, not from earth, not from sky, not from others, not even from time. The silence listens back, and in that listening, you begin to trust the deepest truth of all: you belong here. Solitude, if you stay with it long enough, begins to reveal its true shape. It isn't a wall, though at first it may seem like one. When you first enter deep aloneness, it can feel like confinement, as if you've been sealed away from the world, behind glass, invisible and mute, no feedback, no affirmation, no proof of your place. But slowly, gently, the surface changes. You realize it's not a wall, it's a mirror, and not the kind that flatters. It shows you everything: the beauty you hide, the sorrow you've disguised, the patterns that wear grooves in your mind. Solitude doesn't judge, it reflects. In stillness, the roles you play begin to fall away, not all at once, but in soft, unraveling strands. Without someone else's gaze, there's no need to perform. What's left is what's real. At first, it's uncomfortable, even terrifying, because the self that's reflected back may not match the one you've curated in the hive. The productive one, the clever one, the one who always knows what to say. You might see grief you never let in, anger you labeled unspiritual, longing you thought you outgrew. But the mirror is not an enemy. It is a kindness, because it does not blink. There is a Zen story of a monk who meditated for years in solitude. When asked what he had discovered, he said, "I met 1,000 versions of myself. I bowed to each one, and then I sat in the one who remained." This is the power of solitude, not to eliminate who you've been, but to integrate it, to allow each face, each phase, to rise and fall without clinging. Solitude strips away what is borrowed. What remains is what was always yours. This is why it's not an escape, it's a return, not a retreat from life, but a re-entry into it, from a deeper place. Once you've faced the mirror long enough, once you've stopped flinching, you start to see something luminous beneath all the masks, something that does not require an audience to be real, something that was waiting in the silence all along. You, the original face, before you knew your name. Solitude, if we let it deepen, transforms from absence into presence, but not all at once. At first, it is easy to mistake it for isolation, for some kind of exile. There are no voices to affirm you, no likes, no curated reactions. It can feel like being shut out, like standing before a vast mute wall. But stay long enough, and you'll notice the wall begins to reflect. It becomes a mirror, and this mirror does not flatter. It shows you not how you appear, but how you are. You see the gestures you've performed for applause, the identities you've clung to when you felt uncertain, the ambitions that never quite fed the hunger they were meant to quiet. Solitude strips away the masks, not violently, but insistently, like water rounding a stone. And beneath the masks, something ancient stirs. In Zen, they speak of the original face before your parents were born. A metaphor not for the literal, but for the unconditioned, the self that exists beneath roles, beneath striving, beneath name and form. It isn't hidden. It's just been drowned out by the need to be seen, to be liked, followed, understood. But in the mirror of solitude, that self begins to surface, quiet as breath on glass. You begin to see not just the layers, but the space between them, the stillness holding all you're becoming. You realize that solitude doesn't trap you inside yourself. It frees you from all the selves that aren't really yours. And then something shifts. What once felt like confinement becomes sanctuary. You are no longer waiting to be known. You are witnessing your own unfolding. And for perhaps the first time, the longing to be mirrored by others begins to dissolve. Not because you've become indifferent, but because you've come home. The mountain cave no longer feels cold, it feels lit from within. You bow to your reflection, not in vanity, but in recognition. Here I am, here I've always been. There comes a moment in solitude when you stop looking for what's missing. You stop waiting for the phone to light up. You stop reaching for the old dialogue in your head. The questions, who am I now? What comes next? Why does this feel so empty? Begin to dissolve, not through answer, but through stillness. What once felt like absence starts to shimmer with something else entirely. Not noise, not meaning, just presence. It is subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Like noticing the warmth in a room you thought was cold. Like realizing the forest has grown quiet, not because it is empty, but because something is listening. This is the turning. The hollow you feared becomes a womb. In the Buddhist tradition, the idea of Bait-Nyat, often translated as emptiness, is one of the most misunderstood. It's not a void in the nihilistic sense, but the wide, luminous space in which all things arise and dissolve. It's not that nothing matters, it's that nothing is fixed. Solitude trains us in this, the art of letting go, not just of others, but of the need for certainty itself. And in letting go, we begin to feel what never left. You sit long enough in silence, and eventually you realize you are not alone. You are accompanied by breath, by gravity, by the pulse in your wrist and the warmth in your chest. You are surrounded by what the mind once deemed nothing, but which the heart recognizes as fullness, full of subtle life, of sacred quiet, of being itself. It is like standing at the edge of a lake before dawn. You see nothing at first, then the sky begins to pale, the mist parts, and there, not in spite of the stillness, but because of it, the world appears more vivid than before. You are not filling the silence. You are finally joining it. And perhaps what we call solitude is not the absence of others, but the rediscovery of the one companion who never leaves, the awareness that watches, that waits, that breathes through all things. Call it soul, call it self, call it sky. In the hollow, you were never alone. You were simply quiet enough to feel the presence within the absence. There comes a point in solitude where what you once called emptiness begins to change. Not because the room fills with sound, not because someone appears to rescue you from your aloneness, but because, in your staying, in your stillness, you start to feel something deeper move beneath the surface. The absence you feared reveals itself not as a hollow space, but as a doorway, and what steps through it is presence. A presence not external, not divine in the traditional sense, and yet not entirely yours either. It has no name, but it recognizes you. It does not speak, but it answers. It is subtle, but it is unmistakably alive. In solitude, this is the quiet miracle. You begin to sense you are not the center of awareness, but its vessel. That consciousness itself, unfiltered, unhurried, is not generated by you, but revealed through you. The absence you mistook for abandonment becomes the threshold to something vast and intimate at once. A teacher once said, "It's not that you sit and find peace, it's that you sit long enough for peace to find you. And when it does, it comes not as an event, but as a shift, a softening of edges, a loosening of grip, a return to the moment as it is, not improved, not evaluated, just held." The presence within the absence is not something you achieve, it is something you allow. You might feel it in the space between thoughts, in the cool air touching your skin, in the subtle rhythm of your breath that asks for nothing but your attention. And in that still rhythm, you begin to remember the deep self doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in silence, in spaciousness, in the feeling of being here without needing to become anything else. This is not detachment. It's intimacy of the highest order, not with another, but with existence itself. You are no longer waiting for someone to arrive. You have arrived. And in that quiet, you understand you were never really alone. only distracted from the one who never left. To truly enter solitude, you must loosen your grip on two things: the clock and the crowd. The clock governs your striving, always nudging you toward what's next, what's due, what's expected. It speaks in deadlines, in comparison, in quiet panic. Even alone, it lives in your bones. The crowd, meanwhile, governs your becoming, the subtle push to be someone, to be perceived, positioned, included. And even when no one is present, their imagined gaze lingers like smoke in an empty room. Letting go of these isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like rebellion. It looks like stillness. It feels like a breath drawn all the way in and finally released without rushing to the next. Solitude teaches you that you are not late. You are not missing out. You are not behind. You are here, and here is enough. There's a moment, often quiet and unceremonious, when you realize the mountain you sought was not a location. It was an inner elevation, a lifting out of the tangle of urgency, a turning inward not to escape the world, but to see it from a place beyond its noise. The mountain is not above your life. It is within it, waiting for you to return to its unmoving center. Somewhere along the way, you stop measuring your worth in moments optimized. You stop performing presence for others to witness. You begin to feel into your own rhythm, slower, rounder, shaped by breath and silence rather than notifications. You begin to trust it, and in that trust, something lets go. The clock loosens its grip. The crowd fades like a dream, and what remains is not emptiness, but clarity. A clarity that asks nothing from you except honesty. Can you be with yourself without trying to manage the moment? Can you exist without improving it? When you say yes, not out of effort but out of quiet, the mountain within you stands still, not in resistance, not in withdrawal, but in peace. The kind of peace that doesn't sparkle, doesn't sell. It just holds, like stone warmed by sun, like dusk resting on the skin of the earth. There's a moment in solitude when you realize the world is still spinning, and it no longer needs your constant movement to stay in orbit. At first, this feels like loss. You let go of the crowd, their approval, their gaze, their subtle invitations to keep performing your identity. You let go of the clock, the ticking architecture of ambition, productivity and self-worth measured in minutes. What rushes in is not immediate peace, but a quiet disorientation. Who are you without something to chase? But if you can stay, if you resist the urge to fill that stillness, something ancient begins to unfold. A rhythm older than calendars, a pace deeper than digital time. You begin to realize that not all growth can be charted. Not all presence is visible. There is a wisdom in stillness that the world has forgotten how to read. Imagine a stone warmed slowly by sun. It doesn't rush toward heat, nor does it measure its warmth. It simply receives. That's what you're practicing now. Receptivity without urgency. Existence without performance. A kind of internal alignment that happens not through force, but through release. The crowd will always beckon. The clock will always tick. But the mountain within you does not move. And when you begin to dwell there, truly dwell, something inside softens. Not everything has to be done now. Not everyone has to understand you. Not every part of you has to be witnessed to be real. You become unhurried. And in that slowing, something truer emerges, letting go of the crowd. And the clock isn't a retreat from life. It's a return to it. A return to the part of you that isn't motivated by fear of falling behind or being forgotten. A return to the self that breathes at its own pace, that listens more than it speaks, that feels instead of performing feeling. Here in the hush between schedules and status updates, you begin to feel what has always waited beneath the noise, your original nature. Eventually, solitude is no longer a place you visit. It becomes something you carry. You become the cave, not in the sense of retreating from the world, but in the way stone holds silence even in the middle of wind. Stillness becomes a center of gravity within you. Not rigid, not withdrawn, but steady. A space that listens more than it speaks. A presence that doesn't demand attention, but transforms through quiet. This is the final turn of the pilgrimage, to re-enter the world without losing what you found in the hollow. You return to noise, but you are not shaken. You move among others, but you are not consumed by their gaze. The crowd may surge, the clock may tick, the feed may flash with new provocations, and still you breathe from a deeper place, not distant, not detached, just rooted. And this rootedness is not resistance. It is openness without collapse, attention without grasping, participation without performance. Like the mountain, you become both seen and unshaken. The world will pull. It will ask you to forget. It will tempt you to become reactive again, to measure your worth in speed, in relevance, in noise. But now you know the cave was never about escape. It was training. Training in remembering. Training in how to be whole in a fragmented age. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't need to be protected, because it is the protection. And when you begin to speak, to act, to serve, you do so from that inner stone, no longer seeking refuge, but offering it. This is how the mountain lives in the world, not as a summit to be reached, but as a depth that moves with you. A space where impermanence is not threatening, where solitude is not exile, and where the self, original, vast, unhurried, moves gently through the firelight of impermanent things. You are not apart from life. You are the cave through which it echoes. The world often tells us that solitude is something we step away into, a break, a boundary, a pause from participation. But true solitude, the kind that doesn't just silence the world but softens the self, is not retreat. It is return. Return to what? Not to a version of ourselves from some golden age, not to an ideal, a role, or a performance, but to the ground beneath all of that, to the self that existed before we learned to wear a face, the self that breathes before it speaks, that observes before it reaches, that listens before it labels. Solitude is how we come home to that original stillness, the one that was never truly absent, only forgotten beneath layers of noise. It's easy to imagine solitude as distance, from others, from the world, from relevance. But what if it's the opposite? What if solitude is how we rejoin everything we lost touch with? The sky unfiltered by urgency, the mind unshackled from comparison, the present moment whole and unscripted. There's an old teaching when the student asks, "Where is the path?" The master replies, "You are standing on it." We keep waiting for a practice that looks spiritual, that feels sacred. But solitude doesn't always arrive in meditation halls or mountain temples. Sometimes it arrives when you say no to a distraction, when you choose to walk slowly, when you sit in your room and breathe and listen, not for a voice, but for the silence beneath it. Solitude doesn't take you away, it brings you back. Back to a way of being that doesn't depend on being watched. Back to a center that doesn't shift with circumstance. Back to a life that doesn't need to prove its worth to be worthy. This is the final cone. Solitude was never separation. It was the path through which you remembered you were never separate to begin with. You are not escaping. You are arriving. At the end of a long conversation, when the last word has been spoken and nothing more needs to be said, there is a hush, a quiet that isn't empty, but full. This is the stillness that remains after the words. It doesn't ask for attention, it doesn't perform, it simply is. Solitude, when fully embraced, leaves behind this kind of stillness, not as a state you enter, but as something that begins to live inside you. It no longer depends on silence around you. It hums beneath the noise. It becomes the background, presence behind your thoughts, the space in which experience arises and dissolves. A quiet spaciousness that no longer fears aloneness, because it understands it as the doorway to depth. There's no revelation left to chase, no insight to polish, only breath, only presence, only this. In Zen, there is the image of the silent master who, when asked for wisdom, simply holds up a flower. No words, just the gesture, just the stillness that follows. In that moment, the teaching isn't explained, it is felt. This is the final cone, not something to solve, something to become. When all seeking has stilled, what remains is the one who was never lost, the one who knows how to listen without needing to speak, the one who no longer runs from the empty room, because they know it is not empty at all.